We would like to start with the first panel. And in our first panel, we will discuss the basic elements of a lively ecosystem for spin-offs. We have included in each of the panels the founder's perspective. This is very important that we really have the founders at the table. And in our first panel, our moderator is a founder himself. I would like to welcome Krista, co-founder of Elio, a startup based in Austria and the US. So he brings a very broad perspective. Kami has gathered an interesting round of guests, economists as Monika Köppl-Turyna, who worked on the impact of startups and spin-offs in the Austrian innovation ecosystem, representatives of university as Christine Ruckenbauer. She is the former TTO of the Veterinary University Vienna and has just changed to the other side. She is now the CEO of a spin-off, so I think she also brings a very broad perspective. And we have Henrietta Egerth, the Managing Director of the Austrian Research and Promotion Agency, and Barbara Diehl from the Federal Agency for Disruptive Innovation in Germany. Both will bring in the perspective of a funding agency and an innovation agency. The main question for this panel is to discuss the key function of a working spin-off ecosystem and do we have the right tools in funding spin-offs and what are the ingredients for the composition of such an ecosystem. Kami, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Werner. So in today's panel, we will have a very solution-oriented conversation around two structural problems in creating an attractive environment for deep tech startups in Austria. One as it relates to universities and one as it relates to funding agencies. Hermann Hauser serendipitously, I guess, already set the stage for our first topic. It seems like universities are generally missing the bigger picture. So the biggest value everyone should be optimizing for is building the biggest, most valuable company possible that can be successfully exited. Yet what I've heard from founders and what Hermann just described is that overwhelmingly universities are optimizing for short-term licensing value, creating a lot of obstacles to make the company as attractive as possible for future venture capitalists. The big question here is therefore, how do we change the mindset of universities so they understand that if they remove friction points for startups and work with them in a seamless way, they, and in this case, Austria as a country which funds them, will benefit hugely in the long term. With all of this, I would love to start with Monika. Can you start us off by contextualizing the economic value of startups in Austria and how that also leads to kickback to the universities themselves?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this question. Indeed, we have been working on this topic at EcoAustria. We have published several studies. So what we were able to say, it would not be very surprising, is the fact that a vivid startup ecosystem is very important for growth. It works essentially through the innovation channel. So we were able to quantify this effect for Austria, and we figure out that improving on the number of startups, catching up with the countries such as the UK or the Netherlands, which lead in Europe, would be connected with long-term growth, would be connected with more employment and more innovation. So I don't think this is very surprising. But I think that the important point is how we're going to get there. And you pointed upon the question of universities, and I fully agree with you as someone who has been working at the university for many years. Some of the topics have been mentioned by Hermann already, but I think the problem is still a little bit of the awareness of the university and of the public policy of the value which is created, because we have a new budget for universities for the next 3 years, which is very good. The universities get more money, but this is public money, which goes to basic research. But we still have hard time translating this money into something which actually gives you back tax money back in the form of employment, in the form of companies which taxes. That's why the spin-offs itself are something which creates value for the economy. On top of the growth and innovation effects I mentioned, it also creates the feedback of tax money going back. So we're not very efficient on that in Austria. And I think that there has to be much more awareness in the public policy of the fact that this is actually a very, very important element of the general ecosystem to have innovation coming from startups.
And maybe on the flip side, do you have any idea or data on what the economic loss is that Austria has by having, in many cases, far less favorable conditions to hubs like the US? So kind of what value are we leaking to other countries that we begin to create in Austria, but then never bring back the kickback to Austria?
We don't have that kind of data, unfortunately, but as for the qualitative evidence, it has also been mentioned by Hermann. The point is obviously that we're losing the scale-ups, right? So the problem we have is not that we don't have enough startups in the early stage. That's usually pretty good, and we also have good funding for startups in the early stage. We lose them at the stage when they try to raise a Series A or later stages financing, which is just not enough money. So while I cannot tell you what the economic loss of that is, I can for sure tell you is what has to be done, because we've been looking at the policy element. So the one thing has been mentioned by Hermann, that we still have this problem of the ESOPs, but this is supposed to be solved this year with the new legal form for startups, which would essentially deal with all the problems with the stock options. But the other very important element is that we don't have big capital investors in like really large institutional investors in Europe, and this has to do a lot with pension funds, which we don't have. So the Americans are much better because they have a lot of pension funds which can really invest in the later stages, and some other European countries also have it, such as Denmark or Netherlands or Finland. They have those big institutional investors which can help finance the later stages, and in particular in deep technology, which is asset heavy. So we don't have this in Austria. So I would say the most important element, besides those which have already been mentioned, would be to mobilize private capital in form of reforming the pension system and reforming some other things in Austria, which would be able to provide really large amounts of financing for scale-ups. That's what we certainly should be doing, because this is where we leak the most of the companies in Austria.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for that perspective. And I guess going back to the focus on universities who set the conditions also of how favorable those companies are then to investors. Barbara, you are part of SPRIND, the Bundesagentur für Sprunginnovation, and you very eloquently within that organization have described the issue that spin-off and licensing conditions are often so cumbersome for startup founders that no startups are founded in the first place. How is SPRIND working with the necessary stakeholders like universities to help change this in Germany? And what has been their response so far?
Yeah, so thank you for asking me that, and I was delighted that Hermann Hauser is also active in this space, because I do think we need all the support that we can get in order to really improve those IP transfer conditions. So, as an agency which is firmly rooted in the deep tech funding space, of course. We encounter these sorts of problems as well. So when we are trying to get IP out of institutions and universities, and we just encounter a sort of a myriad of different sort of models and contractual agreements, and just the time and energy that is wasted in the process is just spectacular. So we waded into this arena about more than 12 months ago, and started an initiative that we a little bit provocatively called the Coalition of the Willing. So to really align institutions that really would like to change how things are done so far, and to work towards a standardization and a simplification and more transparency in the process. So yes, we've just published our working results from the first 12 months, and I'm happy to share the link. So please have a browse. We're not done yet, of course. I mean, of course, it's work in progress, and it's a constant sort of onboarding, and it's a constant conversation also with politicians, because of the inherent risk averseness that we encounter within universities and research institutions around state aid and around budgetary constraints. So that they're very afraid somehow to break the rules connected to stipulations in terms of state aid. But I also do think that there are some encouraging signals. For example, the EU Commission has just authorized the reform of the, I don't know what the English term is, but the AGVO, which actually opens up new opportunities for funding startups initially, and for transferring IP in this context. So this is actually around sort of spreading the word and trying to sort of assuage institutions that that they have bigger fish to fry than looking at individual universities' IP valuations.
And I guess on that note, what is the biggest levers that you've found now that you've done that first stock take with the coalition of the willing to change that risk mindset, because that seems to be kind of the foundation of the problem?
I think what we found very powerful in the process is always to expose universities and research institutions to this three-way dialogue. So it's institutions, it's founders, and it's of course investors, and to really align them under this common goal about what are we trying to achieve? What is the goal of successful and good IP transfer? The goal is to build internationally successful and globally investable companies. And so we have to sort of change the mindset within the institutions around this very narrow focus on maybe generating short-term returns on investment or somehow returns on IP, to this, what are we trying to achieve? And I mean, we're trying to achieve, contributions to the ecosystem, contributions to the economy, and we're all building global success stories together. So if you're managing to sort of get people behind that goal, we find that conversations in this context are a lot easier.
Christina, I would love for you to kind of jump in here now, given that you have spent quite a bit of time on the university side, and clearly there's so much to be gained. Wondering how you think we can change this culture, especially amongst the tech transfer offices within universities that you were recently part of.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and also thank you to Barbara and Monika for the insights and what they've said so far. I can really underline, and so awareness cannot be underestimated enough. So I think from my perspective, you really have to start or talk to all the stakeholders. So it's not only to educate the students, bachelor students and master students, but you really also have to educate the rectorates and maybe also the members of the Unirat that we have, because they sometimes are really risk adverse. So as Monika and also Barbara pointed out, that sometimes they fear that they might break any laws, and so they rather stay on the safe side and go the route they already know, like licensing to big pharma, or I'm coming from the life science field, so to establish corporates and going the easy way, like not so much backloaded contracts, but more front-loaded contracts, earlier return to inventors, fulfilling the university law, the paragraph 106, so incentivizing inventors and so on. So as far as I see it, so the universities have now really also would like to start up companies, and so they are building technology transfer offices that can support this, but they're not really, so the mindset is not building success stories on the long run and returning taxpayers' money and adding to the economy, but rather to be a little bit provocative, just ticking the box like we have started a company and that's it. So I think you really have to address all the stakeholders here in order to change the culture, and it has already started. I'm not saying that we haven't started yet. So at the VetMed University, for example, we are quite not a lot of startups, but we have some startups and they are quite successful. But there is a way ahead of us that we have to go, and it's good to see that Barbara can maybe show us an option how it could go.
And on the note of things already being started, are there any interventions that you've seen to be working already, at least at the VetMed University?
At the VetMed University, what really helps is that you have members at the rectorate who are familiar with spinning off companies. And so we are talking the same language: technology transfer, entrepreneurs, and the members of the rectorate, and they then again have to, talk to the Unirat, because they normally, at least at our university, they have to approve the spinning of, or at least the taking shares in the company. So all of them have to somehow have the same picture on the table, and this helps a lot for my work. And I see other universities where members of the rectorate, department heads, or Unirat members, they don't have that experience, and they just really have to be made aware of these opportunities, and that this really not is a risk. So I see that they always see that it's a huge risk, but I see it as an opportunity to spin off a company. And this is already starting, but still have to be worked on.
And just to double click, 10-second answer on this one. The risk you're mentioning that universities are concerned about, is it a risk of like not capitalizing on the IP that they have enough? Or what is the risk? Because they're not personally investing any money. So what is the loss that they see?
From my perspective, the risk is that if you have the two opportunities to license to a startup company, which is not experienced, which has no sales team or no products on the market, and the other opportunity is to license it to a corporate that is already on the market, maybe it's much more safer to license the IP to established company.
Yeah, that makes sense. So Henrietta, it seems like funding agencies in Austria, including FFG, are losing a lot of value for the Austrian state as well if the conditions for Austrian spin-offs don't become more favorable. In your eyes, is there anything that these funding agencies, in particular FFG, can do to help incentivize such behavioral changes in your universities, to make it more attractive for people to spin out companies from those universities and ensure that they're as successful as possible ultimately?
Thank you for the good question. And maybe I just, many things have been said and I don't want to repeat them, but to stress 2 points. So I think what we learned is that it's important to support a clear framework for the spin-out process at universities and academic institutions to make it more transparent and clear for both sides. And if I look at the survey, Werner Wuccio, you've made with Venture Scouting, I think it said, let me read it. Nevertheless, most importantly, there is a call from spin-offs for a move toward a more standardized and transparent process with better communication during the overall process. And the current highly individualized spin-off process often leads to insecurities for both academic founders and universities. And I think this is what we've been talking about. And I'm at a university, in the board of the university for more than 8, 9, 10 years now. And I could underline everything what has been said. There's no clear process. Every university does a new own thing, how to work with spin-offs, outs and offs. There's no clear rules concerning IP. So it's always an individual process, which makes it very difficult. And it makes it, this deal closure process takes too long. It's 10 or more months in Austria versus 8 or 6 months in other countries. The satisfaction with this process then is reflected by the spin-offs. So I think what we really need is, and I think Herman pointed it out, a clear process how to deal at universities with the spin-off process. So this is the one part. And on the other side, I think we need more programs like our spin-off fellowship program, just to mention the positive things as well. The public funding, early stage has received the #1 voting within all European countries by the startups and spin-offs. So Austria is quite good in funding this early stage part. And Monika pointed that out as well. I think there we are quite good. but we miss, of course, the scale-up funding. And the EIC is an instrument which could help, but still it's not efficient enough to how to say, if we don't have enough private capital and funding, this institutional funding by the European Commission could not fill the gap, I would say. With the spin-off fellowship, I just would like to point out that we have more or less 90 startups, spin-offs, academic spin-offs per year in Austria. This is not reflecting a rate of 3.2% of R&D spending of GDP in Austria. These numbers need to be higher. So 90 per year is not enough. But we see that this step from basic to applied research and then to commercialization is yet not receiving sufficient attention by agencies. We don't have enough money for that. We have 50 million euro per year, or for 2 years, I think, for the spin-off fellowship program, which, by the way, we just had a look at the ETH Zurich to copy this program. So we're talking to SPRIND, we're talking to ETH Zurich, we're talking to many other actors in the field to just find the perfect fit for the Austrian system. So this really works very well, this program, but we don't have enough money. And I think Christine Ruckenbauer will probably agree, because you're one of the fellows from the spin-off fellowship program. I can go into detail there. I don't want to stress it too long, but I think these are the 2 points. Motivate and support more researchers and scientists to think about a career outside the academic system, and on the other side, support a clear framework.
That makes total sense, Henrietta, and thanks for giving that insight. I mean, what we're curious about is there any way that the funding agencies themselves can help incentivize creating such standards amongst universities? Do you see any leverage that you as FFG have to maybe pressure or create a better benefit or incentive structure such that universities would actually buy into standard IP?
I think the initiative which is going on right now is something we're supporting wholeheartedly. And we really need this common standard, and we will do everything we can to support on the side of the governmental side, because the Leistungsvereinbarungen, the contract between the state funding the university and the universities, I think we need to have more attention on the spin-off part, because right now the attraction for universities is not high enough to really go into this area too much. Because most of these Leistungsvereinbarungen, you write a report afterwards, it's ex post, it's not ex ante. So then they just say, we supported, 10 startups and spin-offs, and that is it. But I think we need to have numbers beforehand and then really go for it and see if the milestones are fulfilled. And so we need more attention at universities, and we will do the utmost we can to support this process, and on the other side, really find standards.
Great. Well, it sounds like the biggest leverage is maybe bringing in more startup-oriented leadership also into these universities, as was mentioned by Christina, such that behavioral change or mindset shift can actually be initiated. Switching gears a little bit to the funding side of things, as was already mentioned by Henrietta, within the context of Europe, Austria is really seen as a leader in terms of financial support for deep tech. And that is also the response I've received and the feedback from founders in Austria, that they think that this financial support is unparalleled. But what they worry about is that the structure of grant giving is sort of mismatched in many cases to the needs and speed of startups. So bureaucracy ends up coming in the way. Such things like providing an exact plan for the next 2 years of how you will use the money and what milestones you will achieve is in many cases at odds with the essence of a startup, which needs to fail, iterate, and move quickly. And so on that note, I would like to get back to you, Barbara, because your agency in Germany specifically focused on disruptive innovation. And I was wondering, how have you adapted the way you fund projects to the needs of such high-risk endeavors? And maybe as part of that, you can explain what is so unique about that agency that you are a part of.
Oh, I'm happy. I could talk for hours about about
briefly.
No, I just wanted to quickly comment on the previous speaker, because how can you provide sort of more oomph in already existing programs? Well, you know, forever and a day we've always been putting out more incentives, like more incentives for this and more incentives for others. But I actually think that a lot of the mechanisms to make the whole process of IP transfer more efficient are already there. And to be honest, if I would be bad cop, I would actually just saying like, look, if the whole process takes longer than 6 months, you pay back the money that you have received in order to advance your technology into the market. So we are currently working with government reps as well to somehow implement a little bit more stringency and a little bit more sort of push behind the public funding mechanisms that already exist in that space. But back to SPRIND. The uniqueness, I suppose, is that so how do you actually support breakthroughs? And I mean, everybody asks us, like, what are you looking for in a proposal? And we have a grid of criteria. We say, okay, has the proposed innovation the potential to completely rejig new markets? Has it got the potential to build an entirely new ecosystem? Is it addressing a really large scale market failure in some sort of way? So of course these are all very theoretical, but I guess what makes it interesting is how you actually also disperse the funding. So we're quite excited about the challenge-based mechanism that we implemented now almost 2 years ago, which is a kind of a top-down process in the sense of we set a very open and thematic problem, and then people and then innovators, not only from Germany, actually from the whole of Europe, can submit their ideas about how they would actually meet the challenge. But the interesting thing is that the challenges work over several phases, so they only get sort of money in tranches. And I guess at the moment, what happens is that when you put out a call, right, all the competition always takes place beforehand. And once you receive the letter and saying, congratulations, you're funded, kind of more or less set, right? I mean, you write your reports and whatever, do your accounting and so on, but nobody actually checks and say like, okay, how far did you actually get? And so we implemented that sort of stage-gated funding process, and people are actually really responding really very well to it. I mean, it is truly a competition, because we don't actually know which technology will be the one that actually meets the challenge, right? So we are betting on the race rather than the horse. So we are not trying to pick winners in this approach. We are basically saying, okay, those companies that or those propositions that show the biggest traction after 12 months, another 12 months, and another 12 months, they get to enjoy ever higher amounts of funding up until the end of the challenge. And I've had one innovator who actually said, I've never worked so hard for my funding, for my government funding. And I said, yes, this is exactly what we want to implement.
So at those different stages, how do you go about evaluating them? Because obviously if it's so disruptive and you don't know which horse to bet on, it's also hard to set any sort of milestones, right? What is the approach you're then taking to evaluating them at different stages in their progress?
I mean, that's a very good question. But I mean, we basically say to the teams and like, look, you map out how far you want to get in those 12 months. And the good thing about it is actually that the funding can be allocated quite flexibly, right? Within the allocated funding period. So for example, if they realize that they allocated not enough money on this, but need more money on this, we don't really care. I mean, they can change tack as often as they like within the allocated funding period and the money. They can use the money extremely flexibly. They don't have to ask our permission to kind of rejig budgets around that, which gives them a lot of freedom. Yes, we down select, right? So what happens is that at each phase of the evaluation, we look at the proposals and certain teams advance and certain teams get deselected. So it is a true competition.
Great. Well, then I guess jumping back to Henrietta on this, do you think you could adopt some of those practices, such as the ones described? Like, what would be some of the ways you could take inspiration from the more disruptive innovation funding that is happening at SPRIND?
I think you asked me. I'm sorry, I didn't hear it. Okay. To be honest, we looked at SPRIND and we have a similar program which just started. And it's called Expedition Future, where we support radical innovations that we have that have the potential to change whole industries. But as we heard already, it's always difficult in advance to just tell what is a radical innovation and where is it going to. And so we really try to keep it quite open. We work with challenges to get some ideas and get closer to what is meant. But to be honest, we are very favorable about the program we have in place, the Basis Programme, which is very open thematically, size, scope, content, and we have it in place like for years, and companies and also academic institutions can just bring in their applications. And out of that, we really realize that this open, easy mechanism is most of the time something which gives us the most strength for upcoming trends also, because no one really had this focus on quantum like 10 years ago. Then we were there and we were funding it like for years already. And on the other side, like artificial intelligence now, we are funding it for years already via different programs and budgets. So I think, I mean, staying quite open and really letting many ideas come in and then only looking for excellent ideas. That is always the criteria, but not what it is, it's the excellence, which counts is most of the time the most successful way. But we've been looking at the SPRIND program as well, yeah.
Barbara, I see you have your hand up. I'll let you respond. And then as a last question, Christina, I would love for you to jump in and respond maybe to the provocation from Barbara that what if you just took away funding if the licensing process took longer than 6 months? And would that be a process that would be effective in your minds from your experience?
I mean, as I said, you can be a bit good cop or bad cop about it, right? I mean, the good cop approach would be that you pay them an extra premium that is divided between the tech transfer office and the founding team, and that premium sort of gets smaller the longer the process takes, right? So that's the good cop approach. The bad cop approach is to basically ask for the money back if the process takes too long. So that's the sort of the general idea. But sorry, I had my hand up, which was from responding to an initial question. So please feel free to ignore it. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I feel like Monika might want to jump in on this as well, and then we'll close off with Christine on thinking about the good cop versus bad cop approach for universities.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting thought. So essentially the problem, we have like two problems which we have to balance. So on the one hand, as the economic theory tells us that the more risky the process, the more risk of stranded assets, the higher the externality, the more public involvement we need, because the private money will not be able to provide enough financing so that it will be, you know, high enough to account for the social externality, the positive externality of innovation. But on the other hand, I think Barbara has set up the scene very well for the problem, is that the public money is usually not incentive compatible, because, you know, you need to have those mechanisms to guarantee that these things go on. And it actually works better with private money, because people who invest their own money, investors, have more interest, have skin in the game, and they have those mechanisms more in place. And that's actually something which comes from the research. So what we need to do is to balance out those two things, to have the public involvement, but to also have the private component, which is incentive compatible, so that the person who gives the money has enough incentive to be able to control it well enough if the process is developing. So what I came up with the research I've been doing really points out to the mixture of public money indirectly given to private investors as the best way to deal with the issue, because then we'll have enough capital to promote the social innovation which we want to have. And then we have usually good mechanisms in place which you know, deal with the moral hazard of the funders, right? Because there will be moral hazard, there will be asymmetric innovation, and we need to balance this out. So what our research points to is what also Henrietta was saying, AEC, AEF, those kinds of models. I think it's the way to go, but obviously they need much more money if we really want to have a pool of capital which would make a difference in Europe.
And Christine, last thoughts on your end on the good cop, bad cop approach for universities, which I really like.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's I mean, we have programs where we anyway, you know, you have a time period until you have to come up with a contract, and if you cannot show up with the contract, you will lose the funding. So somehow this wouldn't be really new, this also bad cop situation. I mean, I just would like to really respond a little bit to this, again, to this IP standard contracts that were mentioned already by Herman and also all the people discussing now. I think this is really a good idea, and it would speed up things. And I think the problem was recognized, and I think all the universities are already starting to think about this. And we have a really nice community in Austria. We have the Spin-off Austria community, we have the ECN network, and we also have this IPAC process where we together the universities already discussed model contracts. So this would be an ideal, you know, setup to also start talking about IP standard contracts. And yeah, so what I really liked about the SPRIND format is that they not only provide money, but they also provide a lot of network and expertise and some, you know, really accompanying the projects in their processes. And I think this is also something that would help a lot and also speed up things when you know, give also advice and network to the companies. And yes, and finally, again, we need more money on the speed as a seed financing sector. That would also help.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to hand over to Werner in a second for the last 5 minutes of questions. But on my end, I've been jotting down some action items because we want to get out of this panel with some, I would say, action-oriented thoughts. So what I've concluded is, on the one hand, maybe you could apply some sort of good cop, bad cop approach to incentivize universities to shorten IP licensing, and maybe also even to adopt standard IP licensing. Maybe they get more money if they adopt a standard format. Secondly, hiring more startup-oriented or people with startup backgrounds for universities at the leadership level, and maybe also funding agencies, which is already being sort of shown by the success at SPRIND. Stage-gated funding processes with maybe much more flexible allocations of funding, which seems to be one of the tricky pieces within the Austrian funding ecosystem. And then from Monika, giving public money to private investors to have more skin in the game. And with that, we have 5 minutes left, and I'll hand over to Werner for some questions.
Thank you so much, Kami, for this very, very interesting panel. And I would like to give some very brief feedback, I think, concerning the framework and especially also how to deal with IP and all these questions. New Venture Scouting, we got the mandate and we work, as Christine said, very intensively together with all Austrian university for applied science universities and research institutions in the bottom-up process, and we will come up in February with a proposal. So I think we are doing a lot of stuff. I would like to come now up with some questions. First question is, how can public institutions become more risk-averse with partnering with startups? Maybe this is a question also, Christine, for you. You worked a long time as a TTO. And maybe also for Henrietta, from her perspective from the Unirat, there are some models, for example, in Innsbruck to bring in Unirat members in the companies who are managing the spin-offs. Are there any models for a better governance? But Christine, maybe you start in your experience. What is a good way to really bring together startups, but also universities?
Also, as you mentioned also, I think people in the technology transfer that have some experience in this world help a lot. Also, people in the rectorate that understand this business help a lot, and learning by doing. I mean, there's not so much to lose really. So really overcome this fear that something can go wrong and that you might, miss an opportunity. I think this is the opportunity. You just don't miss it, try it. And losing, that's something I forgot to say, because not succeeding is not losing, it's learning, and it's developing and doing it better the next time. So this is also some kind of a mindset that maybe should be strengthened in the future.
So more entrepreneurial approaches at the university. Henrietta, what is your experience in the Unirat?
I can only underline what has been said, because the entrepreneurial thinking needs to be represented in the Universitätsrat, in the board of the university, and then someone has to really have a focus on it via building a holding, or however you organize the startup and spin-off process within a university, different models. I don't know if you really need to have one standard, but probably that would help as well, because then it's not the risk-taking of the board and the rectorate of a university, but it's something which has been applicable and accepted by the governmental bodies and Rechnungshof and whoever could look at that, how universities do that. Because otherwise it's always some scary process, and I think this should be deleted. So this is the first point I would say, and then I think it's so important that we understand for our whole system and also wealth creation within a nation, that you need spin-offs from academic backgrounds to innovate within the society, within companies. So we really have to put a strong focus on this part within universities. I think it's not only something which should happen as well, but I think it's really a main focus we need to put on that.
Thank you. Thank you for this very strong statement. I can answer one question. Do you see today that university take more shares of spin-off companies than a couple of years back? In our survey, we found out that 80% don't take any shares in Austria. And this is a chicken and an egg problems. We don't know if they don't take it because they don't have no instruments, no tools, no holding company or something like that. And therefore, I think it's also very important to share best practice cases, which we do have, like the Veterinary University, University of Innsbruck, and other universities who are doing quite well, and they take shares then. So I think this is also something which has been to change. Thank you so much, especially Kami and the panelists, and I would like to hand over now to Dejan again.